want to welcome you to the second half of our kind of pair of Hacking Exposed webinars, where this one is essentially Cylance versus the previous Hacking Exposed, where we showed you different methods and tools of how to obfuscate commands and weaponization of documents. So today, the goal is to look at how Cylance technology defends and protects your systems against these types of attacks. So with me today, I have our illustrious CEO of Cylance, Stuart McClure.
Well, hey guys. Hello, Brian. How are you?
Doing well, warmed up finally.
I know. I'm super excited about this one. You know, we had the demo gods not properly look upon us this morning, but we've sacrificed many new creatures to get this one done. So I'm looking forward to it. And really excited. I love these things. I don't always get a chance to participate with the Hacking Exposed webinars, but when I do, I really do get into it. And I'll tell you about the RSA conference coming up as well.
Awesome, thank you. And do really appreciate you taking the time today to jump on. Like you said, sometimes you can't. You're a very busy man, but thank you for jumping on today. My name's Brian Robison, attending today from my home office in Montana, where we had a nice chilly morning of -18 this morning. It's now kind of warming up. I think we're gonna get to 0 today. So,
yeah, small wins in the day, right? Just getting up to 0.
Yeah, getting to 0 Fahrenheit's a good day. So, Stuart, go ahead and mention what we're going to be doing at RSA.
Sure, thanks, Brian. So we have, as always, our RSA Hacking Exposed live session coming up in a few weeks. At RSA, we've got 2 sessions, a real short one, a 30-minute deal, talking around about the sort of the scourge of fileless attacks. You know, what are the latest and greatest that we're seeing. We're going to talk then in sort of longer format, the traditional Hacking Exposed live format, around, in specific, bypassing next gen. You know, you see a lot of next gen players out there today. Of course, Cylance is one of them, but we really look to try and move past next gen into AI gen. But ultimately, a lot of people are trying to solve the problem in a brand new way, and but unfortunately, a lot of them fall victim to the exact same problems that we've always had, and it's what's in large part what made Hacking Exposed as a book series so successful. If anybody doesn't remember, I was the founding author of the book series that sort of went out of control with a lot of people writing books and Hacking Exposed, but the original was Hacking Exposed version 1, and we really set forth at that book to never really talk about malware at all. I mean, I think the most we talk about any sort of executables or DLLs are around running tools that might help us hack. So we really always focused on the malware-less or, you know, file-less sort of techniques because, well, they're so simple and they're so easy to use. And everybody used to call the adversaries that would use these techniques so smart and sophisticated, and we really wanted to debunk the myth. You know, me and Joel were really driven around that. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about, well, how do the adversaries bypass next gen today? And so all the techniques you'll see there are techniques that specifically bypass next gen technologies that we've seen in the field. We're not shaming anybody, naming names, et cetera, et cetera. We're happy to do that against Cylance, but not against others. And we'll just make sure we educate you, show you what we've been seeing and how they've been working, and we can talk a little bit about how we can mitigate those threats with and without technology, but largely without technology. So I think it's going to be really exciting. I'm super pumped. It is 8 a.m., so grab your coffee early if you're going to be there. And because I don't think I'll be awake either. So I'm going to need your help. All right. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Brian.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. And maybe we should make sure we sponsor a coffee bar or something right outside the session starting about 7:30 or something, just to get everybody.
Not a bad idea.
I was just looking through some of the notes I have here on some of the demos we're building, Stu, for this. It's kind of cool. We're going to be using reflective memory injectors and different shellcode injection techniques and some kind of fun stuff.
Nice. It's always fun, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yep. And just like these webinars, folks, the goal of this is to create an education forum, if you will. And basically the goal is to teach you how to use these tools to better your own security in your environment. So it's not necessarily about reverse engineering a hack and showing some really custom command and control stuff. But a lot of what I spend my time doing is reverse engineering the hack, but then using off-the-shelf tools to be able to actually reproduce these things in our environment. So using publicly available tools like Metasploit and Invoke Obfuscation and other tools that are available to everybody to help level the playing field a bit. And then there's always some interesting things that we have to work around with. By using off-the-shelf tools, it's sometimes easy to write rules that detect those. So it's kind of fun to play with, but we do have some really cool ways to bypass, as Stu said, the next gen security products, some of them even including Cylance technology. So be great to see a lot of you there, and would be fun to potentially meet some of you guys in person. So
yeah, Brian's such a cut up. He's such a ham, so he loves to meet with people too. So feel free to come up afterwards, if there's time. All right, take it away, big guy.
Yep. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're using kind of the deck, as I said before. This is the second pair, the second half of the pair. So we're not going to spend as much time in showing you how to use tools to obfuscate and things like that. We have some of that already kind of set up. And today's goal is really what we're going to be doing is taking a look at the different Cylance technologies that can help prevent these types of attacks. And as far as I remember in this, Stuart, we are not using any executable code whatsoever. We're not using any.
Right, except PowerShell exe is about it. But yes, that's native, on Windows boxes since Windows 7, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And so using PowerShell perhaps is the only executable.
Yeah. So the point here is we're not utilizing unknown executables. We're not using malware today. We're not using anything that would be traditionally considered an attack. Everything's going to be fileless using executables that essentially live on the host and are already trusted by these hosts. So that's kind of what makes it fun. And just kind of to point out, why are we using weaponization and obfuscation? Well, because it actually works. It bypasses control. Obfuscation bypasses a lot of controls that are out there today. And weaponization with the techniques that we're showing and we showed in the previous webinar, these are the techniques that are working. We are ripping these out of attacks that are attacking organizations every single minute of every single day. And these attacks work. So as I said before, we're kind of reverse engineering these hacks and using tools that we all have access to replicate them. But these are ripped out of the headlines and are being seen every day. So again, we're not going to show today. We're not going to show the invoke obfuscation of how to actually obfuscate, and there's some other techniques that we have as well. If you're interested in that, please look at the predecessor of this one. We used all kinds of cool tools to do some base 64 encoding of commands and things like that. But the goal today is really to highlight the technology to defend against those. And so the interesting thing is all this obfuscation is actually designed to obfuscate the human. It's not designed to obfuscate the computer. The computer has to convert this back into commands and things that it understands. But if you live in the world of a detect and respond technology, where you're looking and you're hunting for things as a human, these things are designed to essentially obfuscate that and to hide from that. When it comes to the computer actually executing the code, putting all these things back together, there's only really one way that it can be done. So that the computer can understand it, but a lot of these examples are designed to circumvent the human.
Yeah, and I love this, by the way. And there's plenty of YouTube videos that you can talk, and see all of the techniques around obfuscation. But this is a great example, and you can sort of walk through and see how even just like, capitalization versus non-capitalization, escape characters, sort of backspace characters, things that will completely obfuscate a very simple command line, which is Brian's going to show you in a second. But putting things in variables, calling the variables back, I mean, you can sort of see it right there in that command line up above.
Yeah, and actually that I like that screenshot because that's actually a screenshot directly out of Cylance Optics, showing the evidence of a command that was executed, and this was ripped actually from a real-world weaponized document. I obfuscated the URL there so you wouldn't see that, but basically this is, a real live weaponized document that actually would go download, in this case, an exe and execute it. And so, these things are real. They're out there, and really the highlight here is again, it's hiding from the human, not hiding from the computer or the technology. So let's go ahead and bail out and have some fun. And what we're going to be looking today are a couple of different technologies right up front. So when Jim, and I gave him a reprieve today for he's busy doing some research anyway, but Jim showed us how to obfuscate PowerShell commands and things like that. So today what I'm going to talk about is actually how do we block and prevent those different PowerShell commands and things like that from running. So we're going to start with our victim system, just like we had before. The only difference is this victim system, does have Cylance Protect installed, which the previous webinar we did not do that. So we talked about the hacks. We didn't talk about Cylance technology. Again, just the same as before, our goal is to establish remote command and control using our Trevor C2. And so that's sitting up over here, set up in the top left is the Trevor server itself, listening for connections. And on the bottom is a little web server that is designed to serve up essentially the Trevor client. And as you know, we've talked about Trevor several different times. I think it's probably due to have a pretty cool deep dive into Trevor maybe in a future Hacking Exposed. But what an awesome command and control that Dave Kennedy built here. And it's
super stable, right? Like it's one of the more stable C2 control channels, right? I mean, that's what I remember about it.
Yeah, it's stable, and it works. It has clients that are written in PowerShell, Python, and now a C# client as well. But the really cool thing about it is it's designed to bypass all security.
Right.
It's not injecting shellcode into memory. It doesn't utilize an exe like Metasploit and other tools do. It hides directly in HTTP clear text because it's basically just throwing commands back and forth to the victim system with HTTP gets, and it's all base 64 encoded. So if you don't know the encoding string that the commands are encoded with, you simply can't decode it, and it looks just like normal web traffic, which is really kind of spooky when you get down to it. So because you're not injecting shellcode into memory and things like that, you can literally use it living off the land with existing trusted tools like PowerShell. All right. Yep. So we do have our Cylance system here installed. I'm going to bring up the little local console so that you guys can kind of see things. And we're going to talk, first of all, about script control. And now script control is a pretty interesting method, but basically what we're talking about here is utilizing these extremely powerful scripting languages that are built into our operating systems and using them to do bad things on behalf of an adversary. So one of the things you'll see here with this environment is that I have Cylance protected script control enabled to actually block access to PowerShell. So in that case, basically we have 100% prevention of any sort of PowerShell-based fileless attack, if you will, whether it comes from a weaponized document or it comes from just a user double-clicking on an Oculus file or typing in commands manually. You can see here basically that we are, we're blocking the ability for PowerShell to actually execute. Now, I just tried to launch the console there, and obviously you can see it stopped that. But let's go ahead and give it a real command. Let's say, for example, let's give it a command that's designed to download our Trevor client from our little web server sitting over here in the bottom left-hand corner. Now, in this case, you're going to see a couple of different things happen because we have all of Cylance's technology installed here. You're going to see essentially script control kind of block things as well, but you're also going to see optics step in and actually do some detections as well and do things like kill the command shell that just was up there on the screen. Now, and so we get lots of warnings from optics, and we're having fun today. So, but basically optics is not just looking at whether PowerShell is trying to execute, kind of like what script control is doing, but it's actually looking at the context of the command that was issued. Things like web client, trying to download files, things like that. And that's why we'll pop over here into our console. We're going to see some things pop up from optics, for example, a PowerShell download. Well, yeah, we saw a PowerShell command attempt to download a file. And what you're going to see here is when you look here, you're going to actually see the exact command in the evidence that was gathered from Cylance optics. And this is, like I said earlier, this is like a screenshot that I showed you earlier of that real world attack. Showed you basically the same information. Now, command exe terminated because optics is a active response tool. It's not just a detect and respond and requiring humans to respond, but it is actually stepping in and preventing the attack from running by actually detecting and responding automatically by killing and terminating the process. And that's because I've told it to do that. Now, in this one, we were able to, optics was able to successfully terminate the CMD exe because that's what it's told to do. It also attempted to kill PowerShell exe. However, PowerShell exe was already killed by Cylance Protect script control. So it was unable to fail there, but it attempted to. So that's actually a very expected result. It's Cylance Protect did the job that it was supposed to do of blocking PowerShell. So PowerShell essentially never really existed. Now the other one, Stuart, let's talk about this one for a second, is this was also picked up by the machine learning module that is inside of optics. And really the goal of this is to reduce the number of kind of static rules that we have in a product like optics. And if we look, I'll pop this back open again. If you look at the PowerShell download, again, it's looking for strings. It's looking for usage of strings and pairs of strings and things like that. So these are very defined rules. And the great thing about the ML machine learning is that it isn't specifically a string or pair of strings. It has been trained and is built around an entire category of types of attacks like this.
Yeah, and this is really important and a key differentiator. As you start to look at technology to try and mitigate a lot of these next-gen threats and all these bypasses, you really have to think about, well, how are you going past rules and past signatures and past heuristics and even past behavioral to predict the unpredictable effectively, or the unknown unknowns. And that's what the goal is of Cylance, always has been, is we want to be able to characterize and classify and quantify attacks in such a way as to then predict any variation of that original attack going forward. And so that's what we're doing slowly but surely. We're taking all of the, let's say, the MITRE rules, right? The MITRE attack framework and rules, and boiling them down into the most essential machine learning modules that we can, and learning from as much data as we can around what makes up those particular types of attacks, boiling them down into the core of the core mathematically, and then representing that so that in real time we can convict, not just against the ones we've seen in the past, but of course all of the variations of those in the future.
Cool, thanks, Stuart. And yeah, it's really becoming a very powerful way to basically scale, right? The idea is that, if you're going to write rules, you can write rules, but the problem is you can't scale static rules. You can't scale signatures. And that's what we've seen, in the execution side of the business, in the PE side of malware, where you simply can't write enough signatures to get everything. So,
well, and Brian too, you can't. So I don't know if anybody, some people probably know this, but so in the signature-based world, which is all traditional AV and most next gen, you still have signatures that you have to update all the time. And so there's this 10-year window of sort of coverage. But at a certain point, you can't keep putting more and more and more signatures on the endpoint because it just is an infinitely large space that can take over an endpoint. So the AV industry, one of the dirty little secrets is they create this window. And what that means is that, for example, that's why Configure has recently come back to haunt people last year in 2018, because that was 10 years ago when Configure first outbroke. And so, being able to get rid of signatures, obviously reduces the, to no updates effectively, but also allows us, for example, to embed our math models into hardware. So one of the things that we tried to do McAfee to Intel was embed security into Intel chips. Well, it's impossible when you have infinite number of signatures that have to be updated on a every second basis, and chips and motherboards and boards in general just are not built for that kind of updating. And so that became a huge challenge. Well, this math-based approach is simple algorithms, and that could be easily ported into embedded systems.
So Stuart, when are we going to see our math model on a chip?
Listen, it's never too, I'm looking forward to it immediately, honestly. With some of the announcements that we've made with BlackBerry, we have some hope there. But ultimately, it can be easily done. We just have to make sure that we're training on the right data and building the right lightweight models to get in there. But it can be done.
Yeah, that'll be really cool when we can see that algorithm actually at the chip level. Man, the performance of that would be pretty cool too. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to come in here to the Cylance Protect policy, and we're going to take a look at script control. And script control essentially is designed to protect against active script, so JScript, whatever you've got. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here, VB script, all that kind of fun stuff that's going to try to execute on the machine. So a lot of weaponized attachments you might see, or .js files, .vbs files, things like that. This can protect your system from those things running. Also PowerShell, right? So PS1 files or PowerShell, scripts that are cut and pasted in the command line, et cetera, things like that. But also macros, and we're going to come back into macros in a few minutes towards the end when we start talking about the weaponization phases. But macros are a pretty cool thing, and we're going to show how those can actually be weaponized and used. Now, the interesting thing is, so you want to look at, if you're going to block PowerShell, you're thinking, okay, well, you could take the draconian approach and basically just turn off PowerShell, kind of like how we did when we started this session here. However, a lot of you have IT scripts that run in PowerShell or other languages that, maybe every time you log on, it does things, in the system. So Cylance actually has two different ways to actually allow approved scripts to run. And there's one way I recommend, and there's one way I don't recommend. First here on the screen is the way that I do not recommend, which is basically providing, relative paths to folders on machines that are allow scripts to run. And while it's an easy thing to set up and configure and it has expected results, the problem with it is that if an attacker finds that folder, basically they look through your system and they see a bunch of scripts sitting in a folder, they can just drop their bad script in that folder as well. Or we have also seen in some attacks where the attacker will put their bad code, if you will, in an existing script that is already on the system and therefore already approved, and then can actually then execute that script every time you log in or whatever. It goes and downloads, the Trevor command and control, for example. So, those type of methods of allowing scripts to run. You know, the functionality is here, but it's not something that I would recommend that we use in a secure manner. The method that I would highly recommend is utilizing a signing mechanism, code signing. And so Cylance has the ability for you to basically take a code signing cert and import it into the console, and therefore, or thereby creating essentially a whitelist of executables and scripts that are signed with that certificate to allow them to run. Now, signing scripts is actually good for two things. One, authorizing the script to run gives it that ability, but also signing the script protects the integrity of the script. So you can't just take you know, some commands and add them to an existing script. If it's signed, it's essentially, you know, you're protecting the integrity of that script. So, you know, you could put it into a workflow inside your organization where, you know, the people who develop and test the scripts, you know, do their job. But let's say before you roll it out to group policy or whatever you're going to do, you have someone be that kind of last gate that actually does sign that script. And so that's the script that can run on the system. And the script is then protected from modification after it's been signed. So I did forget to mention one thing early on in the webinar, and I always do this, and Shirley needs to slap me every time I do this. I forgot to mention that we do want this to be interactive and that there is a Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen to please ask questions. Stuart will attempt to address some of those while I'm kind of doing full screen stuff, but we will also have a little bit of time at the end.
Yeah, hey, speaking of that, thanks for the prompt. So we did get one quick question that I'll answer quick, okay? So Cindy asked, is there a roadmap to add other script control elements, such as Perl or Python in the future? So yes, absolutely, but probably less on the script control side and more on the script modeling side. So we've spent many years building natural language processing model building platform. So we can feed it scripting languages in whatever language you desire, and we can actually start to learn the characteristics of the malicious scripting language itself, and then take those same elements and apply it to a brand new script to look for the not just the context, but actually what's the action that's being taken inside the script. So whether it be Perl or Python or VBScript or JavaScript or you name it, and so look to that later this year to be able to sort of deploy these really cool script models. But yes, we're always adding new sort of script control capabilities, but it'll probably be pretty binary, like either on or off with a few exceptions. So hopefully that helps. We can always get you more detail on the roadmap if you'd like.
Yeah. Good question, and thanks, Stuart. And so, yeah, so script control, like Stuart said, is a little bit more binary. It's either, kind of on or off kind of concepts. But for example, the signing that's built in automatically. So one of the big users of PowerShell obviously is Microsoft, and when they do different application upgrades like Exchange or other things like that, it's very, very heavily PowerShell driven. And the cool thing is that they sign those scripts to not just to give an authorization standpoint, but to also protect the integrity of those scripts once they're in the field. And so Cylance allows those signed scripts to execute from Microsoft, even though you don't check in the Microsoft signing cert into the console. It's allowed by default. But for those of you who write your own scripts or who write your own binaries, utilizing that certificate-based mechanism is actually pretty cool. Okay, so we now have PowerShell being allowed, and I showed you that here on the screen. We modified the policy to allow PowerShell to execute. And so, if I basically just kind of paste in the same command again, we should actually get a download of our Trevor client because we actually have PowerShell able to now execute and kind of do its thing. So we should see eventually, I think we're going to see, and sometimes we see this, yep, so there we actually got connectivity back to PowerShell. Now, we should have a couple of different things that are actually happening here. And I do want to pop up, where is my task manager? Because what I want to make sure that we see is that we actually don't have PowerShell exe running anywhere here in the list of processes. So we are running in virtual systems, and so sometimes we see, as you all know, running virtual systems, sometimes you get some strange timing error type things. So basically what happened here in this example, we actually did get a call back to Trevor C2. It shows we have a connection, but actually if we attempt to interact with it, oops, it says we have a connection, but if I do a dir, we actually don't have a connection because Optics did its job and killed PowerShell and essentially killed the Trevor client from running. So it actually prevented the attack, even though it looks on the surface like we actually bypassed Cylance and got into the system. The actual command itself was terminated. And PowerShell was stopped. And we can pop back over into Cylance here and actually see that as well. So you see here, we have our download command. And this time, PowerShell, launched the first command and then attempted to launch the second command, and Optics did its job of actually terminating those processes successfully. So, I mean, that's as Stuart mentioned earlier, that's a major differentiator from Optics versus some of the other, EDR type of products that are out there. Is Optics is designed to stop the attack from happening and actually not let it proceed in any way. Okay, so it did its job. Yeah, it looked like we, again, the timing on the VM sometimes can be funky, where sometimes we don't see the reverse connection. It kills it before it gets to this point, but it did its job. It stopped the attack from actually happening. All right, now let's move on to weaponization. And basically, I don't want to spend much time in slides, but again, these are types of mechanisms you're going to see with weaponization. You're going to see, things that are designed to social engineering to bypass the user, to get the user to click on things that they normally wouldn't. And so we're just going to basically just drop in and take a look at some cool things here on the weaponization side. So you probably don't remember, but I had, I'll just show this very quickly again. In the device policy, we had enabled script control to block malicious PowerShell, or malicious macros. So the problem is, again, this can be a very draconian type of thing where you're blocking all macros, if you will. And I recommend a lot of people look at macros in your environment. If it's not something you use, either deploy technology like Cylance to block those macros, or even use group policy to disable macros, disable things in Microsoft Office that are potentially dangerous. So we have this document, and we use this as well last time, that actually does have a macro in it. And so we get our traditional, yellow box security warning here. And, obviously this must be something really important. So I want the user to click yes. However, even though we have script control blocking macros, it's a little bit smarter than just turning off all the macros. It's actually looking for malicious intent of the macro. And so if we enable the content, this macro that runs is actually innocuous. All it did was updated my initials, and it updated my my name inside of these fields. So this is a document that can change content based upon the user logging in. But as you can see, it was allowed to run because the intent of that macro was not something malicious. So we're going to come back to macros in a second. What I would like to show you something very quickly is something that does actually, if you will, bypass Cylance Protect script control. we're actually going to use DDE. And we showed this before, how we can actually take a command and embed it into a field in the document and have the document do something on our behalf. And we're going to use DDE to do that. So we do that by putting a field into the document. And as I showed you before in the last webinar, we can hide this, we can put it behind a graphic, we can do all kinds of cool stuff with it. In this one, we're just going to drop it in pretty much straight up text. Oops, I messed that up. Get this just right. All right, and so we're going to use DDE auto, and then we happen to have our fancy little command sitting over here. And we showed you before how you can use a basic command to do something like, again, like download the client, or you can use the more advanced one. And I like this one because this is where you can really get into screwing with your users. And if you guys do this yourself, this is something that you can do in your own environment. And depending on what it downloads, you could make it download something relatively innocuous to just make sure that your users are trained without hacking their system. Now this command is interesting. Obviously you can see, and I'm not obfuscating it in any way, shape, or form because I just want it to, I want you to be able to see, but obviously it's doing a PowerShell web client download. It's downloading the client PS1 file that's over here on the left-hand side. But this one I love because this DDE method allows us to actually modify the error message that comes from Microsoft. And I'm just going to put something in here. You know, obviously it's not something that is important, but I just want to show how this actually works. And while I do that, I'm going to reset this over here real quick. Just we make sure we get a clean setup over here so we can see if anything actually happens. All right. Now, versus the traditional, you know, script yellow box that pops up, you get this one when you enable DDE. You get this kind of a, you know, a dialog box or a modal dialog that pops up, and you get to select yes or no. And, you know, through social engineering in the document, you could say, you know, hey, you need to click on this to let it download, or in the email that it came from, whatever the mechanism is that was delivered this vector of attack, you can, you know, try to get the user to click yes on this warning. The interesting thing about this warning is it doesn't really look like a warning that they might be trained on. So that's why we see these DDE types of attacks happening in the real world even today. Now, if they do click yes, this is the interesting part of that code that you saw back here when I pasted it in. There's some elements of this actual built into Microsoft warning that we can modify. For example, the hello Stuart, you know, we could put something in here, you know, has been scanned by AV or something like that. You know, do you want to start the application? And again, this is fake. As you look at this path, this is not a real path, but I can put in any fake information in here to basically trick the user into attempting to download or click yes. So this is something I really like because this is not obfuscation in the traditional way, but it is obfuscating the error message in a way that we can make it look like whatever we want.
Yeah, I love these DDE fields. I mean, it's almost endless how much you could put in here and nest in here and hide.
Yep. So we click yes, we told it to do it, and basically what we see here are lots of optics detections. We do not see this time the download of the client or the callback to the main client, and that is because optics did its job of preventing the attack from occurring. And it started off with all kinds of different things seen. It sees, you know, obviously a PowerShell download command. You can look at the date and time here to get alignment of all the events that occurred together. You know, you see the rule here, the DDE, you see fileless PowerShell malware. So you can see a lot of individual rules, but, you know, think about what Stuart was talking about earlier with the one-liner ML module. So this is a machine learning module that essentially could replace all three of these other rules and essentially provide the same protection. I have them all turned on so that you can see everything all running together. And that's why you see, for example, Word disappeared because optics was configured to kill the process. So you can see the actual command that was issued, and because it was a parent process to the system, we went ahead and killed Office, Microsoft Word as well. Okay, now I want to make one more little change to our little resume here. Yep, do you want to start it in safe mode? No, we just want to let it run. So it obviously said, hey, there's still something, you know, there was something wrong with this document. I'm going to click no this time. And no, and I'm going to actually delete this formula. All right, so I want to talk about malicious macros versus benign macros, and I showed it earlier where this actually was allowed to run, and so this macro here is not something that is blocked by script control. However, if I replace this with the macro that we made last time to create this weaponized document, we paste in that macro, and let's just save this as a different name. So we'll save that bad boy as a different name. Here's our second resume.doc. We get our macro warning again, because with this new version of the document, we have not enabled the macros in it, and we hit enable content. We very quickly see Cylance Protect stepping in and actually stopping the macro from running. So that's kind of the difference between a bad macro and a good macro, essentially, and that kind of gives you an idea of how you know, script control with macro protection actually does work with optics and with Protect. Okay, so as we get to the, go ahead, Stuart. I think maybe you wanted to mention something.
No, I was just going to ask about you know, sort of the comments. Were you going to cover the comments part too, or no? Is that extra? The one more thing. Okay, because that's my favorite. That's my ultimate favorite.
Right.
All right.
This is fun. This is where Stuart and I get to have a little bit of fun as well. So last time we talked about, and this VB script that we built, and this is something that actually there's several examples of this out there. There are examples in Metasploit for this, although I had to do some kind of serious rewriting for it. It didn't really kind of work very well. And we also see this with actors that are out there today attacking systems. APT32 is a good example of this, also called Ocean Lotus. We've got several write-ups on it, but it's actually really cool that this is one of their initial vectors. And so I made a multi-platform VB script that will, based upon Mac, it'll run some Python code, or if it's PC, it's going to attempt to run some PowerShell code. Now, the interesting thing is, and we showed this in the last one, but the commands are base64 encoded. And so that, again, they're designed to circumvent humans. Now, the interesting thing is that the code is actually not inside the VB script itself. The code, and like Stuart said, the code is actually in the comments field or the company field in the actual document. And rather than going through the effort of building that document again from scratch, I do already have it running on my Mac over here. And so we can go in, we can take a look at this document. So for example, I'm just going to go ahead and launch this. We're going to disable the macro because I don't want the macro to run. But this is basically the same resume that we weaponized. We put this in here. And if we go look, come on, Word. Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah.
Is it the VM kind of slowed down there for a second? Okay, so if we actually go in here and look at this, this is the code. This is the VB script, and this is exactly the same VB script that I just showed you on the Windows 10 system. But basically, it's gonna, what it does is it reads from the comments field. If it's a Mac, it reads from the comments, takes that string, runs it through a base64 decoding program that is built into the VB script itself. So this is the piece that actually decrypts or decodes the base64 encoded command. Then it drops that command down into this command here, which actually executes it on the Mac, for example, in Python. So if you go to the properties of the file, so the code is actually not in the Word doc itself. It's sitting out here in the company field, or it's sitting out here in the comments field. And
could you do, Brian, just curious, could you do it in any of the others, like the author field or title field? Or I know the comments field is probably larger than most other fields, so that's like a natural place to put it, but could you put it in others maybe?
Yeah, all of these fields are available to be queried via that VB script. And yeah, literally,
right. Okay.
it's one of these crazy things. I had a lot of fun building this one because I was like messing around with different fields and different field sizes and things. But yeah, pretty much built-in document properties is a keyword inside VB script that lets you pull from the document properties, and then you simply just give it the name of the field. So if you wanted it to be, author, just change it to author, and you can put it
Fantastic.
in that field.
That's absolutely brilliant.
On the Mac, you can't do it, but on the PC, if we flip back over here, you don't even have to open the document. If the VB code was in the document, you can just view properties directly in the OS and go into details and actually change, these properties directly from, from here. You don't even have to open the document. You can set the comments right here.
Right.
Company, whatever, authors, you can put all that right here. So you can leave the VB script the same and actually weaponize it multiple different ways and just email it back out.
Yep.
Kind of fun. Okay, so let's go back to our Mac, because what I want to talk about on the Mac is, don't save, I gotta make sure I click don't save, is that, obviously here on the Mac, we also now have Cylance installed with Protect and Optics. So it's all here, it's all working. And we're going to see, the goal here again is to establish remote command and control to the Mac. But we're going to see, Optics stepping in and doing things. We don't have script control essentially on the Mac side of the thing of our product, but we do utilize Optics to basically block this type of stuff. So if we launch our document and we, enable macros, we should actually see a callback. Oh, maybe not.
There you go.
We didn't even get
no
into
callback. Yeah, no callback, but you got the trigger.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Oh, wait, you got one. You got one.
So
yeah.
This does run. It does, attempt to download the Python client, but there's no reverse connection in. And if we come over here, we get to see all kinds of stuff that get picked up on the Mac. And so basically this is a non-root user attempting to use Python. And this one's kind of cool because when I looked into this, I thought, Microsoft Word launching Python, but actually what happens is Microsoft Word tells the Apple system tool launch D, which is a PID1 level command, to actually launch Python on behalf. So this is an interesting thing because really what's happening here is it's not even the root user launching Python, it's like the main system control process on a Mac that's actually launching Python to try to execute this code. And then what I want to do very quickly here is I want to go into the rule and I want to defang this. I'm going to remove the actual commands here that say terminate the process. We'll leave notification running, but we actually do want to get this to work because I want to show kind of the second phase of this. And if there are any questions, please ask them. We're going to get into Q&A here in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, let me look real quick. Oh, no, they're very, very quiet.
I'm just going to delete these connections really quick too so we can see what happens here. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
This is kind of fun. So we went in and we defanged the rule. We took away the response that says terminate the session. Oops, one too far. Sorry about that. And so in this case, what we should actually see is this actually, we've defanged it. So we put it into an EDR mode, essentially where the macro should run. We should get the download of the client, and we should actually then get the callback into the Trevor C2 console. So let's do that. And again, remember, it's pulling these commands from a base64 encoded string that sits in the comments field of the document. It's not in the VB script itself. Hey, all right, it worked. So in this case, Microsoft Word is open. We did get our warning. We did get our optics because we basically defanged it. So we actually do now have our session. And so if I go in and I do just a stupid command on Unix, like an ls, I should get back, yep, there it is. I can do a uname-a. So I actually now have the remote control session established to the Mac. And I love this one because I thought this was fun. Last time I wrote a shell script to, this one's fun. Basically, its goal is to get your iTunes password. And so what I did was I built an Apple script that is going to pop up a warning on the end user system and ask for your iTunes password. And it's going to hide it because it's got a hidden answer, but it's going to return it back to me in clear text. So I'll hit enter on this. Uh-oh. Very interesting. What we actually saw happen was optics step in with another rule, and Microsoft Word is gone. It's closed off of the screen. And if we take a look at this detection, this is kind of cool. We see the original detection happen from the script being run, the Python being run, but we also then have an Apple script running by a non-root user as well here. And I think if we look at these, we can actually see, Python attempted to execute a shell script with the Apple script attached, and it's a non-root user running Apple script. So therefore, from the command line, it shouldn't be really allowed. And this is actually, as you can see, this is actually a MITRE rule or a MITRE attack framework piece, but it does actually stop that from running. And because Microsoft Word was part of essentially the attack chain, you saw optics take out Microsoft Word even as well on that. So actually we come back over here to our Trevor. Trevor still thinks we're connected, but if we do an ls right now, yeah, it's not responding. Let's pop into the terminal here. Oops, not Finder. We'll pop into terminal and we'll see if we have Python running at all. Nope, Python is not running at all. And even just executing this command on the command line triggered that same rule, because again, it's a command running by a non-root user that includes Python. So it actually does block it and keep it from happening. So that's
awesome.
Essentially the technology, and we've got a few minutes left over for our handy dandy Q&A. One plug.
Yeah, let's see.
I want to say, hey, our next Hacking Exposed is going to be next month in mid-March. We're kind of taking a little bit of a break so that Stuart and I can work really heavily on the live session at RSA. But we will be back on the webinar versions coming mid-March. So please check that out online if you want. And we now have a couple of minutes for questions and answers.
So we do have one question asking about, is this tool installed in every end user computer or installed in the server? If you're asking about Cylance Protect, it can be installed anywhere, endpoint or server. If you're talking about Trevor C2, that would be on an external server that would be waiting for commands from the attacked computer. But hopefully that answers that question. If not, ask again.
Yep, and if the other question is whether like Python or PowerShell are there, yeah, those are built into those operating systems. So the Python that was used on the Mac, the OSA script that was used on the Mac, those are existing, whitelisted already in the operating system technology. So that's why, you know, Trevor C2 is fun, because it is not brand new code that's being introduced. It's utilizing tools that already exist in the system, essentially living off the land, moving laterally.
Exactly. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brian. Fantastic job as always. And hopefully we'll look forward to seeing you guys at RSA. And if not, we'll catch you next month for Hacking Exposed Live.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Everybody have a fantastic day. Like Stuart said, we hope to see you live at RSA. So please do come see us or shake our hands. Thank you, everybody.